Hello and welcome to our January Masterclass webinar with Syxsense. Today, we have our industry expert, Graham Brooks, here to give us an inside look into the concept of intelligent endpoints and how to architect a solution around intelligent endpoints. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat and Graham will reach out after to answer those. And with that, Graham Brooks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. All right. So today we're actually going to kind of take a break from the traditional content that we talk around in Syxsense. Generally, we spend most of our time on just cybersecurity and all of the bells and whistles you need to know about cybersecurity. And while that's great, we do often forget some of the more fundamental concepts. And so today we're going to spend some time talking about endpoint management and automation, some of the foundational topics there. Most people, they spend their time looking at features and tool sets when they're trying to select a product to implement a solution. The problem with that is they often forget that there's these bedrock architectural requirements that they're missing along the way. And what that usually creates is silos, where you have your security team and your operations teams working in disunity, throwing problems across to each other so that each section of that siloed process can then use their specific tools to fix the problem. And what I want to help us understand is that there's actually a really big disservice to the industry when we use that kind of a process, because environments are nuanced and there's really no one-size-fits-all solution. And so if you can find a process more than a product, it's going to allow you to architect a solution that allows for your teams to work in unity together. That's going to be a much more powerful long-term outcome. And so to that end, today is the first session of a larger series we're going to be doing on the concept of intelligent endpoints. In this session, we're going to introduce the idea of intelligent endpoint architecture and why you should want to implement intelligent endpoints into your security process and practice. Then in future sessions, we will focus on the implementation of intelligent endpoints and how these tools can be integrated as part of a zero trust solution. So to start, what is an intelligent endpoint? Well, it depends on who you ask, but our working definition is that an intelligent endpoint is a device that is capable of safely self-performing IT management tasks without direct administrator intervention or supervision. Now, before we have some IT admins and security officers drop off the call, let me please clarify a couple items. First, the most important word in that definition is underlined. It's safe. Everyone who has ever performed any type of automated task knows how terribly things can go wrong when automation is implemented badly. So we need a way to perform the automation in a way that is safe so that nothing blows up. Next, let's address the other massive elephant in the room: intervention and supervision. I think admins can get behind the idea of not having to intervene every time a device needs to be patched. But supervision, isn't that reckless? Well, it would be. But the other important word in this definition is independent. We are supervising the process, but the supervising happens in an automated process that isn't restricted by slow human bottlenecks. So there's no need to directly deploy work and validate the work in process. Instead, the goal is to focus on reviewing the outcomes of the work that has been performed independently by the intelligent endpoint automation. And then your human intuition and skill set and knowledge will allow you to know what changes need to be made to that automated process if necessary. Okay, so that's Syxsense's definition of intelligent endpoints. Why should that be a target goal for your organization? It's actually really simple. It's just time. And in this case, I'm not trying to pitch you on a product or a solution that's going to save your team time, though that will actually happen by default if you implement intelligent endpoint architectures. Instead, the goal of intelligent endpoint architecture is to drive down response times. Let's take a look at the traditional security operations center, that's the SOC, to IT operations handoff process. Remember when I talked about silos? This is a very traditionally siloed process. The SOC team uses their vulnerability scanning tools to look for and find vulnerabilities. Then they generate a report that describes the vulnerabilities that they found. Then they throw that report over the wall to the security and operations team, along with recommendations on which vulnerabilities to remediate. Then the IT operations team selects the highest priority vulnerabilities from that report that they think they have time to fix, because often you can't do everything. You have to look at the highest priority items and only resolve them because that's what time allows. After they build that, they will then plan out their remediation process. They'll do some research, they'll figure out what they can fix and what they can't fix, and then they will deploy those remediations. As you can see, the arrows go back and forth. So there's going to be points where they're going to have to go from deployment back to planning and then to deployment again, or maybe they'll test it again. There's a lot of different nuance built in there. And then once they've deployed it, they'll hand their findings back to the security team and say, hey, we did everything you said, or we did 75% of what you said because 25 we couldn't get to because it was lower priority and we didn't have enough time. At which point the cycle processes again. If you've attended any of our other Syxsense events, you've likely heard me describe this exact example. It's the standard approach to IT security management, which most companies we talk to are currently using. But it takes a full month or more for most companies to go through this cycle. And unfortunately, it only takes a couple days for cyber criminals to begin targeting and deploying attacks using the same vulnerabilities that the SOC and IT ops team are taking a month or more to fix. So with that in mind, let's return to our definition of intelligent endpoints. It's a device that's capable of safely performing IT management tasks without direct intervention or supervision from an administrator. So I hope right now the wheels are starting to turn on how this could work. We need to be able to reduce the time it takes between when a vulnerability is discovered and when a vulnerability is resolved. SOC teams have a formal process to keep track of this metric. It's called the mean time to resolve, or MTTR for short. The MTTR is calculated by measuring the total time spent from the start of a set of issues to the time that those issues are resolved. This value is then divided by the total frequency of issues. For example, here I've got issue A taking 5 minutes, issue B taking 3 minutes, and issue 4 taking 4 minutes. Then I can see that I've got 3 problems. So if we take 5 plus 3 plus 4, that's going to be, what, 12 minutes divided by 3. You have your MTTR set at 4 minutes per issue. That's just an example. On average, about 36 days if we look at the total security compliance resolution process for your quote unquote average organization. So that's why we want intelligent endpoints. We want to be able to allow you to reduce the MTTR from 36 days down to maybe, I don't know, 5 minutes, an hour, 12 hours, maybe a week max, depending on the complexity and severity of the issue. And I know that sounds crazy, but I'm going to show you how we can get there. And to do that, we have to talk about some nuts and bolts. What components are required for an intelligent endpoint tool to work successfully? And how do we build an intelligent endpoint solution? And personally, I think there's 5 architectural components that you need to look at when building this kind of solution. First, the solution must be agented. Then the communications channel between the agented assets and the control plane must be bidirectional. In addition to being bidirectional, the communications channel must also be able to persist across enterprise and non-enterprise network contexts. Then, the agent must be able to deploy work to its managed devices using flexible sets of instructions. And finally, the solution must have strong tool integrations or cross-platform functionality. For the remainder of today's session, we're going to go into depth on these 5 architectural components, and then we're going to provide you with a different, better model for communications between your SOC and IT operations team. Okay, so agented solutions. Why should it be agented? It's actually simple. All but the last architectural components I've walked you through are going to require an agented solution. Here's why. An agent allows for complex communications between endpoints and their control planes or consoles. A non-agented solution generally only provides for a console to push down commands to an endpoint, and it doesn't allow for the endpoint to communicate back up to the console without being prompted. A great example of a non-agented solution is Ansible. Ansible is powerful as heck, and we love it here at Syxsense, but it's not very flexible because it requires an active, direct, pushed network connection to the endpoint from the control plane. And to have an intelligent endpoint, we need the devices to be able to provide feedback to the console without being prompted, so that the new instructions can be delivered based on information which the endpoint has provided to the control plane. This is how you gather real-time telemetry and security data from your devices. Security events, unfortunately, don't only happen once a week on Thursdays at 3:30 p.m. during your maintenance schedule. They happen all day, every day, 365. And on that same note, nowadays, work happens from a variety of physical locations. A solution can only communicate to your network-based devices is a solution that's not going to work. It has to be able to communicate across lots of different scenarios. So you're going to need a product that offers some level of cloud management. Generally, we'd consider VPN connections insufficient for an intelligent endpoint network. On the flip side, your solution also needs to be able to play well with network restrictions and proxies. So those are our first 3 components. Those are the kind of the network-oriented components of intelligent endpointing. So assuming that those first 3 architectural components are satisfied, we can now move into intelligent endpointing as we figure out the filters that we need for the products that are going to provide us with the functionality we need. And generally what we think of for functionality is flexible instruction sets. For those not familiar with the language, a flexible instruction set are instructions which are more concerned with outcomes than with methodologies. In the military, this is called the commander's intent. It's the idea that while we care about how work gets done, we are much more interested in the end state, the outcome, the goal. For example, if the commander's intent is that a ditch be dug by 6 p.m. and they haven't given you any other instructions, then the soldier has a bunch of options on how to proceed with the instructions. They can dig it by hand, they can enlist help from their teammates, or they can acquire machinery to expedite the digging process. Through training and standard operating procedures, these are your flexible instructions, the soldier will know that they should probably take a hybrid approach of individual effort, team support, and machine augmentation. The same rules apply to tech and cybersecurity. The commander's intent is that the MTTR on priority vulnerabilities that are really important, that are critical, that are game-changing to the organization, those issues should not exist for longer than 5 days on the network. The commander's intent doesn't actually say what PowerShell scripts to run or which vulnerabilities to resolve, just no more than 5 days for issues with greater than, 7.0 CVSS scores. An intelligent endpoint solution should be able to find and fix vulnerabilities and configurational drift dynamically given that baseline requirement. And it should not be beholden to an analyst manually deploying scripts and executables to remediate non-compliance. This gets back to our original definition of intelligent endpoints being able to perform management tasks without direct administrator intervention or supervision. The goal of an IT analyst should be to focus their time on commander's intent, not manual intervention. Intervention only should be necessary if the automation goes off track, which, by the way, will always happen. It doesn't mean the automation is bad, just means that your context has changed, and automating is an iterative process, which then brings us to our final architectural component. Intelligent endpoint platforms can't exist in a vacuum. Your CMDB platform needs to talk to the IT automation platform, which needs to talk to the ticketing platform, which also needs to be able to talk to the SIEM platform. The more integrated you can make your tools between security operations and IT operations, the better the information you can get out of them, the more informed you can become. On Tuesday of this week, I had the pleasure of sitting down for a virtual chat with Chris Steffen. He's the Managing Research Director of Enterprise Management Associates, and he's also responsible for a whole heck of a lot of other stuff too. If you haven't checked out that session, I strongly recommend watching the recording, which we have hosted on our website. During our conversation, we talked extensively about what makes for successful zero trust and cybersecurity projects. One of the key takeaways from that session was that you need to start with a strong set of environmental data. If you don't know the full scope of your environment, like what types of assets you have, who your users are, where they work from, and any other context you can think of, then you won't be able to make educated decisions. And without those educated decisions, your commander's intent will likely be inaccurate to the situation on the ground. And no amount of automation can help you fix a bad project scope. But if all your IT and security tools integrate with each other closely, then they can provide a more holistic perspective into what your environment looks like, which in turn will help produce a strong data set and a strong commander's intent. This right here is the beating heart and soul of our intelligent endpoint definition, a device that's capable of safely performing IT management tasks independent of direct administrator intervention or supervision. Because you have all that information informing it what to do. So what does that look like in practice? Here, we have a new process for managing compliance. We call it our intelligent endpoint continuous compliance. If you're familiar with DevOps, this should start ringing some bells. This process is not a monthly project, but rather a daily compliance standard. The process starts with the intelligent endpoint solution monitoring and managing its own state. As enforcement issues arise, security metrics are reported to the control plane hosted both on-prem and in the cloud. Then the console or control plane generates an analysis of the enforcement issues discovered by the endpoints themselves. This analysis is then reviewed by the operations and security teams together. No more throwing problems across the wall to the other side of the fence. We all sit down at the table together and figure out the solution as a unified team. Once that solution is determined, operations then will test the changes to the compliance policy, which point the policy down to the control plane and then down to the endpoint for real-time management. And if necessary, that process still can be bidirectional, where they go from writing policy to testing, back to writing policy, and then eventually send it down to the control plane and the endpoint. Okay, compare that to the traditional process. It's static and it's a loop. It's got extra steps and it's slow and it's brittle. It doesn't provide a context for security and operations to work together to create a solution that works, that's fast, that drives down your mean time to resolve. I hope that it's clear now why intelligent endpoints are valuable and viable. With that foundation in place, next time we meet, I'm going to begin the conversation on how you can actually implement an intelligent endpoint product. Until then, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, or you're also welcome to send them to us via email and we can address them offline. So feel free to type in chat if you have anything you want me to address here.
Hey, Graham, I actually had someone reach out when they signed up for this webinar.
Yeah.
They were asking, could group policies be an intelligent endpoint solution?
Ooh, super good question. They could be part of it. So group policy is kind of more that conversation around the process, not the goal. So you would use a group policy to do the work, the actual on the ground solution. The thing about group policy is it's not particularly flexible. One of our key architectural requirements is you need flexible instruction sets that can change on the fly given a particular scenario, which we're going to talk a lot more about that next session. That's going to be really the focal point of next session, is talking through what does a flexible instruction set look like? How do I build one? What tools are there that provide those sorts of functionalities? But yeah, I think you probably could use group policy as part of the solution, though I do think there are more modern, more efficient, more effective tools out there. But very good question.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then
Mhm,
I also have one more. They said,
mhm.
what if we aren't comfortable with an idea of an unsupervised automation? It seems too dangerous.
Yeah, 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 totally. Well, I hear that. I get it. And the problem with that is when you talk about supervised automation, when you talk about directly supervising the work getting deployed down to your endpoints, what you're building is essentially gravity. You're creating more friction in the environment. You're forcing more button clicks. And you're also assuming that having a human directly pushing the button is going to improve your compliance, not decrease your compliance. And unfortunately, what we've seen is the human element, when it's directly integrated into the process of management, often creates more errors than it solves. And what we're trying to describe is obfuscating that human element one level up. So you're still managing it, you're still monitoring it, you're still ensuring that you don't have endpoints that are becoming broken because of some sort of compliance issue that was poorly executed on. You're still monitoring that, but you're not looking at a device by device basis and saying, I see this vulnerability, I need to go out and fix this vulnerability, which is what we see here with that traditional stages of compliance process. So instead of looking at the scenario as I'm scared because I can't see what's going on, you still can. You still have full control over the process. It's just that process is more dynamic and it's not as restricted to whether or not you caught the issue as the analyst looking at the endpoint by endpoint basis. Hopefully that's a good answer to your question. If you want, I'd be happy to talk about that further offline.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Graham.
For sure.
That's all I have on my end, and nothing has come into chat. So guys, again, if you have any questions, feel free to ping us in that chat, and you can also reach out to us, and we'll get those answers for you.
Awesome. Thank you everyone so much for your time.